This is Keys to the Shop, episode 376, a conversation on career and the industry with Matt North. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio, and I'm your host for this show. Happy to have you along today. Those of you who are new, hello, welcome to the show. We've been doing this for 6 years now, over 2 million downloads, over 600 episodes, and we're just getting started. The best place for you to get started if you are new to the show is just go to the website, keystotheshop.com, and go to the upper right-hand side and type in the subject that you want to know about, something that you're going through right now or just an area of interest, and that will pull up a ton of episodes and content for you to peruse. And I definitely think you should subscribe to the show as well. If you're subscribed, then you will always get updates on new episodes as they come out. Right now, we're at about 10 episodes a month. That includes all of our short format shift breaks and the longer format episodes such as this one. So go ahead, get subscribed and share these episodes and share the show with your community, with your team. Share Keys to the Shop on social media whenever you have the opportunity, because that's how the podcast grows and this content gets out there into the world and helps make the world of retail coffee a better place. Now, on top of doing this podcast, Keys to the Shop offers consulting and coaching for you and your business. So that means you get to work one-on-one with me at Keys to the Shop Consulting to help you work through any issues you might be having, to give you coaching, perspective, clarity, and tools and systems for successfully running a great coffee bar, whether you're just getting started or you already have your coffee bar up and running, but you want to take things to the next level with your operations, your quality, your people. This is what Keys to the Shop Consulting is positioned to do and has helped so many people do over the years. There are a lot of ways that we can work together. If you're ready to take a step in the direction of more clarity, better tools, systems, perspectives, and greater joy in the process of running a coffee shop, then do reach out. Chris at keystotheshop.com. Now, years ago, I was introduced at a coffee show to something that was pretty new on the market and was just starting to hear rumors about. And to me, it was really fascinating. And over the years now, it has become just a phenomenon in terms of technological breakthroughs for coffee brewing. I'm talking about the ground control Cyclops brewer from Voga Coffee. It's a very interesting looking brewer with the glass on top and the sleek design. It is very engaging, but once you get past that conversation starting design element, you realize that this is revolutionizing coffee brewing as we know it. The SCA award-winning technology in the ground control brewer gives you the ability to control the extraction of an incredible range of flavors in your coffee. So the absolute best from your coffee will be able to be displayed in every batch of coffee. So batch brew coffee now has leveled up with a ground control, but it's not just for brewing batch coffee. The extraction potential of this machine allows you to create tea, batched iced lattes, batch cold brew, tea concentrates. There's all sorts of applications that people all over the world have used the ground control for. Check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee for more information. I truly think if you're looking to actually differentiate yourself through the quality of your product and gain more efficiency on the bar and open up avenues for profitability, the ground control is a great choice for you. I think you should look into getting it in your cafe. Again, for more information on the ground control Cyclops brewer, go visit them at groundcontrol.coffee. It's always great when you can depend on something. And when you have tools that just work, it makes the biggest difference in terms of how well you can serve your customers. The same goes for ingredients. And when we're talking about quality and reliability for performance with plant-based beverages, there's no better option for your coffee bar than the Barista Series from Pacific. The Barista Series was created for baristas and tested by baristas all over the world before any of their lineup actually makes it into the market. That's why it performs so well. It stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome silky texture, great for latte arts, and then also, and you would say most importantly, the balance of the beverage, the taste. really is focused on the coffee. So it's a harmony of flavors and it performs so well. I encourage you to check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com and get samples in your store today. Again, if you're looking for dependability, quality, and the best offering for your customers' plant-based needs, I think it really does need to be the Barista Series from Pacific. All right, everyone. Well, I'm excited because, when we have conversations with people on the show, sometimes we'll talk about one topic and we'll dive deep into that. But then there's conversations we have with people who have done so much in the industry, and we get to cover an incredible range of the supply chain and their career. And this is one of those conversations that I'm so excited to present to you. Honestly, I could have talked to our guest today for another hour, as it turns out, hour and 20 minutes. And I know that's a long amount of time, but I guarantee you, stick around, break it up into 2 listening sessions if you need to, but it's really worth it because our guest today is Matt North. Matt's career has run the full gamut of the industry with jobs in both national and local chains, as well as time in the consumables market and engineering side of the coffee business. This has all given him a really well-rounded view of the coffee world. And in 2013, Matt opened Full Court Press, or FCP, which was a small specialist multi-roaster coffee shop. And now it's a Nano roastery in the heart of Bristol in the UK. Matt's knowledge and passion and attention to detail was at the core of what made FCP quickly become a leader in the city's coffee scene. In addition to that, his cafe's excellent customer service, coupled with the team's ability to really articulate well their extensive knowledge in an approachable way, which is obviously really important in coffee. We've talked about that here on the show. That really ensured that Full Court Press not only served exceptional coffee, but it sparked a lot of interest in specialty coffee among customers, which is wonderful. Now, having sold his cafe, FCP, in 2021, Matt has moved on to the green coffee side of the industry as a part of a European office for an organization called Raw Material, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise working in all aspects of the supply stream. He is also the author of the acclaimed book, Coffee, A Modern Field Guide, and recently has served as national coordinator for the UK chapter of the Specialty Coffee Association. And just like anybody who's been around and growing and learning through challenges and ups and downs and, experiencing different facets of a industry like this, you're going to have some wisdom to share and stories to tell. And that's what you get in this conversation with Matt. So not only do you get to hear the inside scoop of the progression of his career, but also the hard fought for insights that he has developed as a result of being a lifelong learner and somebody who wants to get below the surface of the thing that he is involved with. And in the conversation, we take the opportunity in several points to just dive deeper into questions that concern the entire industry. So I hope you're ready to be inspired and to learn and to think deeply about our shared industry here in specialty coffee. Without anything else from me, here now is my conversation with Matt North. Well, Matt, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. It's the end of a busy day.
Oh man, well, I'm glad that you're at the end of the day. I'm just starting mine over here in the U.S. But I am excited to have you on the show. I've been following your career in coffee and business for the last few years, and I know I hold you in high regard, and so do a lot of other people in the industry. So getting to know you a little bit more on the show and hear your thoughts and perspectives is going to be quite good. I think the first thing that we want to start with, of course, is your entry into coffee. Was it an enthusiast route that you took to start your coffee journey, or was it sort of a professional route, as a lot of us do end up as baristas and then end up pursuing it professionally?
Definitely the professional route because of the time. Specialty coffee didn't really exist in 2000, really. It probably technically did, but certainly not in the common mind space, and certainly not in the common retail space either. I was at university in Manchester in Northern England and had done a lot of retail and other food service in the past, Pizza Hut, Gap, and was in need of a new job. So I took a job at a local little cafe and just mostly a bar, but had some coffee making, and then ended up at one of the only major chains in the UK at the time because this is pre-Starbucks. I ended up working at for a cafe chain called Cafe Nero.
So you wanted to stick around for some reason, yeah, that attracted you to it. You had these retail jobs, and a lot of
Yeah.
people who work retail jobs just can't wait to get out of retail jobs. But there's something about the coffee industry version of retail still attracted you to stay in it. And what was that?
It's the people. I think it's if I'd have been more of a night person, I may have ended up in alcohol. And I'm not a night person, so the idea of being able to work behind the bar, to have that regular human interaction, which is something you don't get in the retail space as much, um, was extremely attractive because coffee wasn't good. It wasn't good. Let's let's not beat around the bush on that one. It was nowhere near the standards of even very average cafes these days. Um, so I wasn't staying in it for the incredible sensory aspects of what I was serving. I was staying in it because I enjoyed the people, both those people who worked with me and for me in the long run, and the people I served every day.
You had to have drank coffee at the time,
Oh
and
yes, yeah.
knowing what you know now, of course, you look back and you want to shame your former self and say, "How could you drink that?" But in my own history is around the same time frame, and I know that there were times where I was thinking, "Oh, I'm going to have this cup of coffee," and sometimes I thought it was nice. I mean, was that the same for you? That you didn't really know better at the time, so you're kind of grasping for what the redeemable qualities of these coffees were, because there was no progressive or modern coffee at the time, like you said.
No, 100%, 100%. I mean, my introduction, I think, to coffee, like a lot of people, was on from one of our parents, and with my mother, who is from New Jersey, so there's a deep sort of American side to my family as well. It was French vanilla roast, flavored coffees, or
Oh,
Gavelia through a Mister Coffee. It was very much that side of it, and then you come to like in the UK, it was just this half and half, not Italian, not American coffee culture that didn't really have a place. Uh, I don't look back ashamed at it or shame myself for thinking it was good because it was good because it's what I knew. And at each step along the way, I said it before, I think, to people when they've asked me about this, like I was lucky that coffee got better as I was involved in it.
the coffee got better. So what, I mean, at what point did it get better for you where you started to, that really just hooked you, and
Yeah,
you obviously experienced it in real time.
yeah, I progressed through another retail chain in London, Cafe Nero, and then called Eat, which was more of a sandwich chain, but also did coffee. And there it was all about efficiency and standards because the goal then was to take the order and serve the coffee within 90 seconds. So they were incredibly
Oh,
efficient. I know it's fast, incredibly efficient. But that then led me on to learning all about the efficiency of running a bar. And I was sort of consciously taking all these different parts of the coffee business without really it being involved in coffee as a core product. And it wasn't until I worked for a smaller local chain where there was a more coffee focus was the first time I encountered there actually being two blends, a continental and a house. So one slightly darker than the other. Um, and that was what, 2005 maybe? And then by 2007, I'd progressed into working for a consumables company, selling syrups, um, some Da Vinci Gourmet, selling Blendtec blenders and hot chocolate powders and everything. But that was the year I'd sort of discovered coffee competition and went out to see more roasters because that was obviously part of the job. And then really started to sort of see that difference in, oh, there are a lot of different coffees out there and coffee is a thing. 2007 when James Hoffman won the Worlds, and that was kind of the year I think I discovered that coffee wasn't just something you put milk and sugar in.
what was it to you then? A lot of people view this as something that, of a revelation, especially when they come around a community where you were isolated. You started learning things that were in front of you, and you
Yeah.
learned about bar flow and
hmm
efficiency. But then all of a sudden, this world opens up to you. How did you interpret that difference?
I think it was that classic revelatory cup that I think everyone has. I think also that that cup dates you a little bit in the industry. Because I think
Mm.
at my age and around the early to mid 2000s, it was definitely a washed Ethiopian or a Kenyan was the one that was like, wow, this tastes like blackcurrant. Why does it taste like blackcurrants? This is crazy. And then fast forward 5 years, and it was all Ethiopian naturals. And now it's people having anaerobics and anoxics and carbonic macerations. So like that gateway drug almost into the fact that coffee is so different is changed as coffee has changed. Um, but it was just this revelation. It was like, hey, this tastes like blackcurrant. Why does it taste like blackcurrant? Why does it taste so different to what my air quotes coffee expectation is?
Well, how did you first? Well, you didn't have that revelatory cup until you were exposed to the competitions, but what drew you to the competitions in the first place before that happened?
I mean, it wasn't even a competition. It was literally I was meeting one of my uh, now longtime friends, but one of my customers, and he was a roaster, and he pulled the coffee straight out the literally an hour out of the roaster and brewed an AeroPress, and away we went. It was that was the cup for me. But we were exposed to the competitions because the company I was working for, Beyond the Bean, were involved with sponsorship. So that's how I came into the competition scene from the business side, and have then kind of stayed around that ever since as well. It's been through side entrances almost in all these things. Like, I didn't come through competition by wanting to compete or seeing how amazing coffee could be. We were a sponsor, and so I was around competition in that way. And then from that, being exposed to it, got to appreciate it more and was having my eyes gradually open to what coffee could be.
So this fascination with what coffee could be as you were exposed to it, and as you've now had so many different experiences in the industry as a barista, as
Yeah.
somebody who is working for this consumables company, you've
Hmm.
got the back end business experience, and now you're exposed to a larger community, global community of coffee and what coffee
Yeah.
can be. Your perspective on things, was it shaped by the things that you were studying in university and your approach to just topics and subjects in general, coffee being one of them?
Yes, 100%. Um, I did physics. So I was a physics major. Um, and also, I actually abandoned a PhD to continue a role in whatever it's become, coffee.
As you
Because I
should,
realized,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. I realized after a year of doing that that the life of a research scientist just wasn't for me. But that training shaped the way I look at and think about coffee and everything to do with it. So I've done a lot in the past. I've done a lot of work around grinders or espresso flow, and it's very rudimentary, but I had some grasp of the basic concepts because of the training I'd had in the past. And the way I maybe
Well,
approach tasting in that way is also informed by that process.
how does that differ? Let's say Matt's brain versus my brain. I being not trained in physics, engineering, or anything like that. Um, Maybe I sort the categories I of topics I take in a different way. Like how does that process of training impact the way that you sort information and then act on information?
I think it's a cause and effect and a training to look for a root cause to a problem and then address it in a certain way. So it really helped when I got into engineering because the realization quite quickly that espresso machines are basically very big boilers or very big kettles. And then you could follow the flow of the problem from step to step to step to step. You can do the same thing in coffee. And it's that approach of breaking it down piece by piece so you can really isolate potential issues or problems or phenomena and then look at them and then build the puzzle back up together again before you have a clearer picture of what's going on. I think that definitely came from uh, that sort of scientific background for me, and an open mind. I think it teaches you to have an open mind when you're coming into something.
That's really good. Having an open mind and then that analytical disposition
Hmm.
to kind of figure out what's underneath the surface of what it might be just an assumption,
Yeah.
especially if you're just learning about these things.
Yeah.
And yet, and a lot of people will learn about a subject like coffee
Hmm.
and not really have that much of an analytical mind. Let's like tell me what I need to know, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm, being new into the industry, a lot of people wouldn't think to actually question what they're told.
No, I think, and we see this all the time, don't we? We see this in the baristas who have a dangerous amount of knowledge when you're first learning, and you become very confident in what you know without having reaching that point where you know the depth of what you don't know. And I think it's one of the major stepping stones in any industry and any person's growth is that humility to understand that what you know is dwarfed by what you don't know.
How do you manage the balance between having a respect for that vast sea of what you don't know, and letting that be an inspiration rather than a force to stop you?
It's a very good question. How do you do that? You have to, in some cases, understand that you're never going to learn everything. It's actually impossible. But you can also, you don't have to learn everything. So it's a pool of information and resources there for you to pick and choose what takes your fancy, what you find interesting. It's there for you when you need it. But there's no need to be an expert on everything. There's no need to deeply understand everything. And I think I've seen that in my progression because now as I've gone from business to shop ownership to now working green coffee, at each stage, I've needed something different from that pool of knowledge. And it's not that I haven't been interested in it before, but it wasn't relevant to me. Like it was useful, it may have been, but it wasn't truly relevant. I didn't need to know about how drying temperature affects shelf life of green coffee when I was making espresso behind the bar. But likewise, now that I'm importing and exporting green coffee, how the latest developments in espresso or filter brewing affect the small dynamics of water flow through a coffee bed is interesting, but not as relevant.
It's interesting to think that the educational desires of a lot of the coffee professionals out there are related to things that are outside of what they're actually doing.
Yes.
And it's so novel to them that
Hmm.
they want to learn exactly the reverse of what you just described, which is if I'm a barista, I want to learn about agricultural practices.
Yeah.
Not that my regular mocha customers are going to let me regale them with all of my knowledge, at least not willingly. The thing is that it maybe there's
Yeah.
this idea that we already know everything there is to know about the thing that we're currently in, and I guess that's maybe hubris a little bit.
Oh, 100%. I think it's hubris. And I think it's a luxury that maybe I have because of I've been around a long time. And I'm in a position now, and the last two jobs, I've been in a position now where I wasn't reliant on anyone else for progression. I wasn't reliant on having to fight my way up from being a barista to find a new role. So I didn't have to expand what I needed to know
Mm.
as much. Whereas you can see it, like you can see that to move on from the vast pool of baristas now into an increasingly shallow number of jobs as you move up the pyramid. Um, what you know is, I just always question whether it's truly relevant to what you're doing. So are you sacrificing some of how good you could be now in pursuit of what you may be in the future? And I think a lot of friends have applied for jobs recently, and they're like, "Why don't I have any experience doing this?" Okay, well, nobody has any experience doing the role until you do
Hmm.
the role. You can read about academically, you can ask some people, but everything's going to change by the time you start doing it, and it's how you react and how you learn then that's going to be key.
Well, that relates back to the way that you had a mind to absorb and or organize the information that you were being presented, which is not a formal
Yeah,
education. That's not somebody giving you the information. It's you receiving and processing the information so that you're teaching yourself or you're letting your experiences teach you.
yeah, Yeah, I think it's gonna be super interesting now that there are more and more formal courses in coffee education. We see UC Davis, we see ZHAW in Zurich, or the SCA courses. Now that there are more formal courses in coffee education, what does that path
Mm.
look like? Because I'm not on it anymore. So I'm interested as I meet new baristas or new people in the industry to see what their path looks like, um, and how they can progress through it. I've seen a lot of very qualified with qualifications people who are still trying to move up that ladder and find a job that they want. It's an interesting. Are we going to have a workforce that's going to be incredibly qualified, qualifications wise, but not actually in the jobs that their qualifications technically suit them for?
Sure. And to, ratchet that down a little bit more is the idea that you might be qualified technically, but in practicality, you're
Mm.
useless.
Yes, they are two very different things. 100%.
Well, the idea of all of this is that you're not letting your fascination with what you don't know keep you from taking action on things that you want to do in the future, which I imagine is why you went from, you know, having these revelations of what coffee could be and through your career
Hmm.
developing to the point where you wanted to open your own coffee shop with full court press.
Yeah,
Um, which
yeah.
I think, because you mentioned your mother is from New Jersey, you have the American side. I know there's a basketball reference in here.
100%. It was originally to be called Bases Loaded.
Ah, yes.
That was my original title, and then it's we're actually near the main court building as well. So I was like, I can't pass up this idea for also a pun of where I am in the city. So I have to go to full court press. So that's fine.
That's amazing. Yeah, I didn't realize that there was a pun in there also.
Yeah, it was well, it's that, and also, it's a full effort defensive technique, and that's how we approach coffee
Okay, so
or something.
talk about how that translates to coffee then, from that idea of a full effort, because you have these ideas of what you want it to be, and Lord knows that there's other coffee bars around, and some people will say, well, I want to
Yeah.
differentiate myself in maybe some ways that are just kind of wacky. And for you, how did you want this to manifest in the scene, as it were, in the day?
Well, it was a lot easier in 2013. It was a lot easier because there were literally two places in town that we would look at and recognize as being modern third wave, for want of a use of a better term, coffee shops, specialty coffee shops. So it was very easy then. It was just a case of literally open the doors and you would be different.
I see.
Uh, but there was a little more of a thought of an approach. I wanted to be multi-roaster. I knew that very early. I wanted and had ideas of treating it as more of like a specialist food item, like a high-end wine bar, and that soon faded in terms of the approach of service, because I realized it wasn't me, and the style quickly became more friendly, cheers orientated, where you had style where you had people regulars in every day, and it really became a place where it became the third space for a lot of people. But that was then married to the menu, and the menu was, um, no drinks on the menu, it's simply the coffees. You can have it as espresso or with milk, and there were two espressos and two filters, and they would change every week. So if you came 51 weeks a year, you could potentially have over 220 coffees.
Wow. How did that get received?
Very difficult at first because it was very new and it was a lot of emphasis on the service and explaining the menu. Uh, but soon after we settled in, I think after like 6 months, we had a core group of regulars who kept coming back, and the city started to get used to us being around, and you could walk in. They had some trust in us to choose what was right for them.
What kind of coffees were so you have all this rotation as a multi-roaster shop in that time? there might be a
Hmm.
handful globally of shops that are doing multi-roaster.
Yeah,
Of course, I
yeah,
think very early on there was Billy Wilson's Barista in
there was, yeah.
Portland, and then I forget who
Hmm.
else, but it was a pretty new concept and daunting, also considering the fact that you've
Mm,
got to dial in a lot of different styles and interpretations. So, what did that process
yeah.
look like for you on the back end for selecting and then actually doing quality control?
I very, very quickly realized two things. One, that was that I would narrow down to some degrees a core of roasteries that I could always trust. That I knew that whatever we got from them, we would be able to maximize that product. So that was fine. I always had backups, safety nets to go
I
to,
see.
and that would help us to deal with those times where we took a chance. Because if you're changing your coffee every week, you have to keep casting your net wide. Um, and that quickly led into the a realization that the goal wasn't to have a set style. I couldn't afford to serve a particular style of coffee. The goal was to present the coffee that we were buying in to the best it could possibly be. Brew it to be the best. You don't have to like it. Like as a barista, I did not like 25% or more of the coffees I served. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was to present it in the best form that I could make it as balanced, make it as full of flavor as we possibly could, so that people could appreciate the differences of the coffees as they came in. So it was that realization that it wasn't about presenting my view on coffee. It was just presenting a clear view of what coffee could be by just making each coffee as good as it could be. Um, that was a big moment when I realized that.
That's great. And then you are probably focusing on particular styles of flavor that end up being voted on by just how frequently these things are ordered or the feedback you get from consumers. In the time that you opened it, I imagine that changed over the years. The taste of the consumer changed. How did it start? How did that evolve?
It did, but it was actually less. The consumer really didn't have much say in it. It was very selfish on my part. I bought what I wanted. If I wanted to try a new roaster, I just bought it and put it out there. And that was the joy of having two coffees on. You could play with the menu. So you could say, okay, we're going to have a central and then I'll put an Ethiopian on. Or we'll go for an Indonesian, but we'll pair that with a Kenyan. So there was always balance or some options on the board for people. And the fact that you were then today able to present two options to people allowed them to choose what they thought was the best. So that was their choice. In terms of whether they wanted to have particular coffees, there was really no feedback. It was very selfish on my part. I just bought what I wanted to. And then that relied on having a good feedback loop with my roasters and sometimes falling out with them and never buying from them again because roasters like to think that they're right. Um, there is a there is definitely a trend of baristas blaming roasters. Um, yeah, oh, it's not my fault, it's the roasters. But I also, in my own hubris, thought I've been doing this a while now. I'm pretty good at this. If I can't get anything out of this, there's something up. Let's have a discussion about it. Let's at least talk about it. And if your reaction to me was, "Nah, the roast is fine. It's you," I'm like, "Oh, okay.
Interesting.
I will not be ordering from you again then." And I've had that. I've had people send me back in the day send me roast curves. I check the curves, they're fine. I'm like, well, it doesn't really tell us anything, does it? I'm not really a roaster, and I know that that's not going to tell us anything about how it tastes. And it was one of these interactions that eventually led to the whole discussion about water in coffee with Maxwell,
Mm.
because we had the same coffee at the same time from a roastery, and he's 11 miles, his cafe is 11 miles from mine. So very similar water sources, using the same filters at the time, using the same machine, order the same coffee roughly at the same time. We're both having the same issue. We're like, well, what's going on? And that led down this rabbit hole of, I wonder if it's the water that's making the difference. So that, if anything, shows the importance of having good rapport and good feedback loop between a roastery and a cafe, because it can open up these incredible rabbit holes that you get lost down if you're willing to have that conversation.
If you're willing, that was it. Yeah, I mean, if that conversation happened, it could have been you and the roaster talking about water,
Hmm. Yeah.
rather than having that, cut off of communication where there's not even an exploration, which I'm imagining, especially because of your mind of wanting to explore and
Mhm.
get curious about these things. The
Yeah.
lack of curiosity must seem particularly offensive.
It can be, it's disheartening rather than offensive. It's disheartening that a lot of times, and I see it now in the feedback loop between roasters and producers. Um, there's very little, there's very little openness to that curiosity about what's going on from season to season. Why is something changed? It's just, oh, it's changed. I don't want it as much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, okay. There's a chance here to learn something, and it's been presented to you on a plate. Um, I always find it disheartening when people don't grab that. I also understand it because it's not relevant and not important to some people.
And it is also our defensiveness if somebody says this coffee doesn't taste right. If I'm a barista, if it's just a customer coming up to me and saying this coffee doesn't taste
Yeah.
right, immediately I'm just like, I was trained by
Oh,
champions.
100%. Yeah.
Pardon me, I've got a certificate, and it's the same thing, right?
Yeah. Yes. No one wants who likes to be told they're wrong?
It's not
Who
even
likes
about
to be
being wrong,
told that
though.
something they yeah, like something they've done doesn't please somebody in this job. It's like, oh, this isn't, I don't think this is right. And it's very hard to turn around and then say, oh, actually, yeah, you're wrong. I'm right. I made this for you and I can't be wrong. It's very hard to accept that there might be something at fault and then to be open enough to explore that and find out whether we can improve it, or find out whether you were wrong and you did do something wrong, or there is something wrong with how you're brewing, um, and you just got lazy or something.
Mm.
And it's one of those rare customers who is just has an openness in their palate that is like able to go, this doesn't quite taste right.
And if we think about the fact that practice over time creates a sort of familiarity and a knowledge base, customers who are good customers of maybe one or two different choices that they make on a daily basis have thousands of different tests that they've done on particular beverages that even the best operators haven't, through their QC programs, bother to taste as many lattes as your customers. So when they tell you something is off, it feels like no, but then they're actually the expert.
Yes, 100%. And they're instinctively spotting when one of a myriad of different variables has changed. Um, in the latte, it could be the milk. Is there a breakdown in the temperature control of the milk delivery? Is it that time of year where they move from silage to fresh grass? Because that's going to change the nature of the cream content and the flavor of the milk.
Sure.
Um, all these little things that can cascade down, and instinctively they might just spot it because it's not quite the same as it always is.
At what point did you, so now you started FCP 13 years into your coffee journey, right?
Hmm.
And by that time you have taken in a lot of information just as a sponge to learn at
Yeah,
first, but then also in some
yeah,
authoritative positions, and especially with the experience of opening and then doing the QC for a variety of different types of coffees. And you
yeah,
have to have gotten to the point where you felt comfortable enough to write the book that you wrote about coffee,
yeah,
right? So that was only,
yeah,
I think it was published in 2014, which is 1 year into when
yeah,
you opened. So it was Coffee
yeah.
Modern Field Guide. What went into that, and that book from your experiences, and what did you want to accomplish with that?
So that was a regular and a friend of mine who was coming into the shop, and he had an idea of doing this. He was in print, and he wanted to publish a series of these guides. The idea was that there would be a series, and there'd be a different topic on each one. As he did said to me, if I write a book, will you fact check it for me? I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't mind doing that. Fine, it's easy enough. A week later, it becomes, well, do you think we could sit down and make some notes together? And I'm like, yeah, we can make some notes. It's okay. Fast forward a couple months. Do you want to write it? And I'm like, I've never written a book. All right, let's give it a go. Um, and it was really led by the size because it's A6, so it's very small.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the idea was it would be no more than like 64, 65 pages. So we're not dealing with what is the common and is still the common format for a coffee book, which is a coffee table book that can sometimes actually be a coffee table. Um,
Right.
they're very big, they're very lush, they have lots of interesting pictures in there, and it's designed to be picked up and put down and draw people in long term. But they also are not that useful as a ready reckoner guide. Like it's not something you could keep with you. It's not something you could absorb information in a short, concise manner. And that was an interesting challenge to me when he sort of described it, what he wanted it to be. This idea that it was something you could carry around in your back pocket and you could have as a reference guide at all times. Because one of my things I realized when I was at university I was there with a friend of mine, and he was the guy who could get from A to D in physics like that.
Mm.
Oh, this is what happens. But ask him to try and explain that concept. Can't do it. Couldn't break it down into bite-sized pieces. I was the one who could build the thing that would test it, but then would go A, B, C, B, C, D, and I'd get there slowly in steps. I was not that skilled at the mathematics and getting there, but then could explain the concept, break it down in a way that people would understand it. So to be able to do that and have that challenge in coffee, that was the driver behind it. It's like, how can I take the key concepts of growing or milling or trade, which is the section we added in the latest reprint, but do that in say 450 words rather than a whole book about it. I've read some very good books recently on the economics and trade side of coffee. They're very long, and it's my job, and I'm still getting through them and going, oh, this is hard work. This is a difficult book to read.
Yeah.
And that was never the goal. I wanted it to be something people can go, oh, awesome, I've learned something, and accessible for people who have been in the industry for a long time, but also you could come in, never really know anything about coffee and still understand the basics.
That's a really great approach. It reminds me of Richard Feynman.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's the don at that. His ability to explain in complex concepts is unparalleled, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, and the idea that, I mean, if anyone looks up Richard Feynman talking to you about physics, you would have to really be convinced somehow that he is a professor because of the way he talks. I mean, his accent is northeastern U.S. accent from the time and everything. We're predisposed to aesthetics, I think, and whether that's volume of information or just the design of something to validate whether it's worth you looking at, and hence your idea of these books being so large and complex. But I love the idea of simplifying complex ideas, because ultimately, the complexity of our modern world is actually a lot simpler than people would have thought about this age if you had told them about things 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We just take it for granted now that we have cell phones, we have the technologies that we have. Yeah. They went from complicated, large, now they're small and sleek and efficient.
And you can see that in a much more accelerated timescale just in coffee. I mean, we both started as baristas many moons ago. Big train to tamp at 30 pounds of pressure, being the little clicky grinders, and then there was a Chicago chop or a leveling tool. We never weighed anything. Run it through until you see it by eye. When it starts to blonde, that's your shot level. This was all a lot of feel involved. And in some ways, that was far more accessible because anyone could do those things without having to get into the minutiae of measuring and flow rates and how much magnesium and calcium do I have in my water. I think that gets lost a lot of times with the information we're trying to take in. We've seen it accelerate so fast. It was maybe more accessible to get into coffee and into the industry when we started,
Well, for you, what is the
and
goal
now it's much harder.
of those things, of the innovations that we are creating, like with quote unquote third wave or progressive coffee? Saw the entry
Mm,
of lots of different tools. It started with things like, oh, let's take the spouts off the portafilter, and other
yeah,
things similar. We started to move away from some of those more feel things into the more analytical elements. What is it that maybe even just subconsciously we were trying to and maybe still trying to accomplish with that?
I think two things. One, we were trying to quantify and understand what we did feel. I described it a long time ago in a temper tantrum, I think. Like, if you throw me a ball and I catch the ball, I've done, my brain has subconsciously done a whole set of complex ballistics work to track the trajectory in the parabola and to move my hand at the right time to intercept and catch the ball in midair. The fact that I know this and could calculate it does not make it less magical. I know how a plane flies. It doesn't stop me sitting on next to the wing and looking out in wonderment as this several thousand-ton thing lifts off the surface of the earth into the air. It's inherently magical the
Mm-hmm.
way it works. And here we are creating these drinks, these espressos and these filters through touch and feel, the artistry, when in reality, all we're doing is subconsciously understanding flow rates. We're understanding weights, puck density, pressure, all the things that we're now quantifying. And once we can quantify it, we can then see the areas that it can be improved. And we're at the marginal gains era. We're at the part of the brewing coffee where there are marginal gains of improvements to be had.
The marginal gains that we're making in coffee now, they don't seem like they're as some people have, we'll talk about this, that there was an era of coffee, and it probably was in those early 2000s, where there was a lot of big changes happening. And now, like you say, the
Mm,
aggregation of marginal gains, it just over time, little things. And that doesn't set well with a lot of us. We like, oh, well, we need to have more revolutionary change. And maybe that's misplaced.
I think it is. I think that is misplaced. I think it's natural that we are gradually chipping away at the boundaries of the knowledge we have. So that the closer we get to those boundaries, the smaller the incremental differences we're going to make. Like, there's going to be a limit at some point to how we can maximize water flow through a bed
Mm-hmm.
of coffee. And intrinsically, that's what what espresso and pour overs are. One's under pressure, one's not. It's just passing water through a bed of coffee. And at some point, we're gonna reach a reach a limit where the small changes you make are going to be indistinguishable to the senses, and they probably already are at the peak of it. Do you think? Do you think we're at that point where chasing that little bit of uniformity of the puck or extraction uniformity is beyond our ability to sense?
Well, it the term "jumping the shark" comes up in my mind, where
Yeah,
a lot of brands,
yeah, good old
yeah,
Fonz.
exactly, they come up with things and tools and breakthroughs, quote unquote breakthroughs, that may have been a breakthrough had they just, if you showed a flashlight to a caveman, yeah, okay, yeah, that's a big shift,
Yeah,
right? But to your point, these marginal gains are not as earth shattering, but that doesn't sell product, and so you have to
no,
amp it up a little bit. And I think what we're seeing now is that things are so consistent, at least more accessibly so today than they used to be.
yeah,
We have
yeah.
to sort of BS our way into innovation.
Oh yeah, yeah. Maybe it's less BS. in the innovation, but rather we have to come up with marketing has taken control of the products to some degree. Like we have to justify it with innovation, justify the product with
Hmm.
innovation, rather than letting the product come from some new work. I think so. What's certainly definitely interesting is that off the back of all this, there's never probably been a bigger gap between the really enthusiastic home barista and what you see in the cafe day to day. Whereas at one point, everyone wanted to make coffee like they make it in the local cafe.
Yeah.
And all these innovations that have come along, palm tampers, WDT, RDT, blind shakers, burr alignment, decent espresso machines, all this stuff that's come along. Now, cafes are like, wow, I wish I could make stuff like the people at home do sometimes, but it's not practical. But it's not
Right.
practical. And it might have led to a lot of home baristas saying, well, I don't drink out anymore because can't get good enough coffee. And that's an expectation problem that they have.
It's born from our own hand, where we've facilitated
Mm,
people with the tools through our industry, and vertically integrating,
yeah,
home tools with commercial tools. La Marzocco has the Linea Mini, and every large
yeah,
manufacturer has a home version. And it's more
yeah,
roaster focused. Like, everyone's a multi roaster. Everybody is FCP at this time. It's a home
yeah,
barista.
yeah,
And it's interesting, the cycle of this. We don't know where we are in the cycle, but great coffee in cafes, a lot of that was attributable to things that home baristas were doing, like Andy Schechter in upstate New York with PIDs, turning David Schomer on to PID as a concept that trickled
yes.
into the
Gregory's case.
bloodstream of coffee.
Yeah, 100%. And are we seeing that cycle again? That was alt.coffee on Google
Yes.
and Coffeed, which I got refused entry to.
Uh-oh.
Not bitter. Wait, I am. Lol. Coffee joke there. Um, and yeah, that was what it was. It was home enthusiasts on Home Barista then feeding into the cafe market. And are we seeing it again? And will we see more of that feeding into the cafe market again as these home baristas push the boundaries of what's possible? Um, I think the interesting thing is to see the two married is now it's a far more efficiency and throughput driven game than it was, say, 5 years ago as a specialty cafe. And maybe that's the business side of it, is that we saw like this our second wave cafes become very large chains off the back of being very efficient and really understanding how to get customers and customer flow through and maximize sales at the till. I thought the specialty model was all about being the counter to that. Oh, we're different from that. It's more experience focused. It's more this. And as you've seen the specialty scene grow, we're a homogeneous brand of our own, and every cafe looks roughly the same, give or take a few design cues.
Mm-hmm.
And B, we've realized that the times of the way expenses have changed. Sorry, in terms of rent, in terms of all the inputs coming in and all the extra competition, means that we now have to be, and maybe people like Blank Street are the ultimate point of that, where it looks like specialty coffee, it has all the design cues, but it's designed to be as efficient as possible and get people through the door with a fast food style replicable product wherever you are in the world.
That is a placeholder in a sense. When we're talking about Blank Street, there's a lot of controversy around it,
There is, yeah.
because of that throughput prioritization. That, no, we're not
Hmm.
saying that we want people, like, slow automatically equals quality, because I've had plenty of terrible coffee that was served very slow. Um,
Yes, it's true.
so, and equally so, I think if you've got the design and the machines and the branding and the bespoke trappings, that also is not something that you could count on delivering a quality product, although our marketing has taught people that those are some of the telltale signs that you're about to get quality, which means there's going to be some bias
100%. Yeah.
involved. So it feels like there's an opportunity to say, okay, we've basically created a naturally occurring caricature of ourselves in the form of these types of
Yeah.
businesses that we can now iterate away from and use as an opportunity for innovation rather than bemoaning the fact that it exists. It feels like it was just some divergence in the timeline that now we have to be like, okay, that's there, but what are we going to do to further it in the direction of what values we think should be promoted in specialty coffee, which I guess
Yeah.
maybe is a great. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. What could be the way that we move forward from observing the thing that we're like, what have we done?
No, I think it's not even a case of what have we done, because it would be like this idea, like everyone talked of bands in the 90s as selling out. Oh, you were counterculture, but now you've signed a big record deal and you've sold out. Well, they've just done what every band has ever has done, and they've just taken the money and explained it to them because everyone will. You know,
Mm-hmm.
someone gives you the bag, you take it. Um, and we've seen this in the cafes. So what are Starbucks and the big chains of our second wave, if not growing out of the mom and pop stores of the first wave? And what are these chains now of third wave specialty cafes and straddling specialty behemoths, if not growing out of the independent coffee scene of the early to mid 2000s? So that you're right. The question is, what comes next? What is the next iteration that will spark the next cycle?
It feels as though we had to tell ourselves that the idea of efficiency, just like the idea of having food in the coffee shop at one time was anathema to specialty, like, we
Yeah.
just do coffee,
Yes.
right? Because we're
Yes.
afraid of ourselves. We're afraid that if we take our eye off the ball, then we're just going to completely shatter because we're just insecure. I think it was just based on insecurity. As we mature,
Mm.
we're able to say, no, this is why the Australian model of cafes is proliferating so much, is like, oh, you can do that. Back when G&B did milkshakes for the first time,
Yes.
people were just in awe. And the only reason why they said that it was okay for them to do it was because of their pedigree in the industry. It was always
Yeah.
okay for everyone to do it. We just didn't give ourselves permission until people that we looked up to made it okay.
Yeah. We didn't want to. We'd set ourselves a an impossible standard by trying to differentiate too much in some ways from what had gone before,
Mm-hmm.
that we ended up just doing what had gone before, just with a different focus, maybe a different quality outlook, um, and a different coffee quality outlook, certainly in terms of what we were trying to present. The question then becomes: have we just homogenized to the norm again in that? But we have strayed away from the original question. Is like I don't know what the next iteration will be, and my fear is that it will be some time before we see it, and that's driven by the slow change of uh, I guess, cultural uh, swirl. Like we're already seeing the 90s and the 2000s come up as Halloween costumes right now, and as being vintage. Um, and that's basically within living memory, and nothing actually looks that different back then.
Yeah.
Really, it's all very, very similar. So, are we going to be stuck in this model we have for some time, and is that just waiting a larger cultural shift before we see a new kind of coffee come out? What I would want to see, and this is maybe the green importer and exporter and the social activist in me coming out, is a shift away from this efficiency based model, primarily because it also drives an efficiency in buying. One of the most disappointing things I've seen in the past 2 years is a shift down in price and quality across a lot of the industry because they need to keep their costs low as green coffee prices have gone up. to historic levels in some countries. We've seen a lot of morals and ethics of buyers exposed because they cannot follow through on carrying on the buying and living up to what they espouse, which is paying a good level, a fair price for the coffee. Once that price that we set as an idea of specialty got destroyed by the market, which is kind of ironic in a way, we weren't willing to keep paying it. It's an interesting problem. I'd like to see a change to that efficiency model to allow us to spend more money than we think we should on green coffee. And that might mean not spending 7 figures on a fit out. It might mean not changing your coffee machine every 2 to 3 years. It might mean a lot of things. Maybe paying your staff well as well. That'd be good.
Might mean fewer coffee shops.
Is that necessarily a bad thing?
See, I don't think so. In some ways, that remember the movie Speed with Keanu Reeves.
Oh, yes.
We are going at
Legendary.
55, and we have what we have, and we don't want to stop it because we think it's going to blow up. The pandemic, it didn't only close businesses that people desperately wanted to keep open, which was tragic, but it also allowed people who desperately wanted to close to have an out for something they felt had started to control them, providing more opportunity for businesses that could absorb those customers, where now there's an influx of money and opportunity should you choose to use that money for those things that you were describing.
Yes, 100%. I actually think the generational change will come from the same generational change that is affecting, say, voting or social activism, in that there's going to be a whole wave of baristas coming up to be green buyers or roasters or business owners who have been exposed to these ideas of wage equity, gender equity, income equity for producers and baristas in a way that we weren't when we were coming through the industry. It wasn't really a talked about topic. Now it's very hard to avoid it. So maybe that's what I think the next wave will be, is that we'll see a more equitable version of our industry as a generational change, because this information that we have is out there, and this information that we have is being absorbed by people constantly. In many ways, echoing back to the beginning of the conversation, these baristas are looking past what is maybe relevant to their job to learn more and more about the coffee industry at large. And I hope that will then influence their decisions and their management style, their buying decisions when they become those who are in positions of authority and power within their industries.
How do you manage the difference between having, because whereas before we didn't really talk, there were things we talked about and it was coffee. I mean, that was really it.
Yeah.
And then there was people who just took that and said, I'm going to open a business. And they did. There was a shorter length between the idea and the execution, and now it feels like we're just talking way more about a lot of things, but there's not as many people who are talking about things that are in the midst of the thing they're talking about, participating in it, and maybe that's the next step.
Yeah, I can see that. There is a constant looking forward, and I hope that there's a level of application of that when they get to that position.
And it's the good business practices that keep these types of institutions that make a difference on the values that you're describing for social justice, et cetera, that will allow for change to be created over time. So learning good business, and like you said in the beginning of the conversation, you look past where you are to other areas. I wonder if the fact that coffee bars being what they are now, and the fact that there isn't as much consistency of excellence necessarily in the cafe as there is in the home barista, it may be because the model of cafes are so consumed with things beyond their immediate cafes, that they've taken their eye off the ball a little bit on executing what is ultimately the representative of their brand in the coffee shop.
I think there's a case to say that might be true. I would argue that actually the financial pressures of running a cafe these days are what is forcing that, taking the eye off the ball. It's extremely expensive, as I'm sure you're
Mm-hmm.
aware, to keep up with your competition, to open a cafe these days, to just keep one operating. And this very concept of what is good business, perhaps we have become guilty of equating good business with growth, with profit, with um, turnover. Whereas one of the things that a lot of your guests have said in the past is that good business and is actually good business management, and that's people management. That's looking after your staff. That's caring for your suppliers and caring for your customers, um, rather than having eyes on the bottom lines constantly. Now there is obviously an element of you have to stay open to do that.
Yes, you need to be
Um,
profitable.
yeah, but how much you need to be profitable is an interesting choice. I think this neatly ties into FCP. So I never intended that to be more than one cafe. It was deliberately designed and set up to be a one cafe business, which is not the norm. You look at any other cafe opens, it's these days people will say, I'm going to open one and then I'll have two or three down the
Mm-hmm.
line or more because it's a model that can be rolled out. That was never designed to be a model that can be rolled out. I described myself many times as a bad businessman in the conventional sense because it didn't make a lot of profit and we didn't have multiple sites, but good at running a business because I developed the staff as well as I could. I mentored them as well as I could, hopefully moving them on to better positions in whatever they wanted to do, right? Not just coffee. I would often surprise staff members within 2 weeks of them joining saying, so now I've hired you, how do I get rid of you? And the goal of that conversation was this is you like at this point you can't go anywhere higher in this business because I'm at the top of the food chain, I own it, and until I sell, which eventually happened, there's no way of vertical progression. So how do I give you the tools to move on? Is that business management so you can go and open a cheese shop? Is that the time and space so you can learn pottery throwing, so open a ceramics shop? Is that using networks and connections to try and link you up to become a roaster? Like, what does this look like for you, and how could I help you get to that point? Which really took the idea of mentoring to an interesting level for me. But because of that, it was never about making an awful amount of profit, and that gave me an awful amount of freedom. I think we either get beholden to this idea that we have to be successful by the bottom line, and that limits this focus on quality. I could focus on quality because as long as it made enough to stay open, and it did for 9 years, it made small profits every year, tiny ones, enough to stay open. Then I could focus on coffee. I could be selfish in a way, but I could focus on the quality and keep that focus going and focus on the quality of the people that came through the door as well.
In and of itself, profit isn't the why. It is
No.
you were being faithful to the structure and the constraints that you
Hmm.
had set up for your business, and at the
Yeah.
time you could not have done something that another business who has set up um, in a different way does, because it would have ruined your business. So you were simply
Yes.
saying, this is who we are, and other
Hmm.
people might open with and operate within just as much integrity and faithfulness, but
Yes.
have 10 cafes, and what they're doing
Yeah.
with the profit and why they're profiting, as long as it's congruent with their values, would be on equal footing.
100%. It's profit in and of itself isn't a bad thing, and this idea of doing it isn't a bad thing. But I think it can become too much of a focus, which is a shame, and that's probably driven. That's probably enforced upon us by the financial conditions of us of like society at the moment, where everything does cost an awful amount. That we do take our eye off the ball in terms of the quality of what we produce or buy in, and the quality of staff. care we take for the staff, because we have to focus on the financial side of it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And so you sold FCP to,
Hmm.
I'm interested in a little bit about that, and how you moved into green and importing.
Well, I'd realized it was originally a 7-year lease, and I'd realized about 5 years in that I was never going to renew it myself. And it came to the point of getting towards there, and I was looking for something new to do. And I'd come across this company that I work for now called Raw Material, um, via a cupping tour they did locally. And I started chatting with them, and a role became available with them, and I chased it down because I wanted to learn something new. It was time for me to learn something new. Not that I'd exhausted what I could do in the cafe, but I was starting to get a bit old, 40 odd, and ready to not be on my feet 12, 13 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yes.
Ready to do something else and learn something else. So it was time. But that necessitated either closing the business or selling the business. And about that time, one of my baristas expressed an interest in opening his own place. And I was like, well, do you want to buy half of it, and we can be partners? So that was the first step. The first step was him buying in, becoming basically an equal partner, and then I would go and do my day job, take no more money out of the business, but be around, and ideally mentor him to run it, and I would just be a silent partner until such time as he could buy me out. Then COVID got in the way, as it did for so many
Yes.
people, and it was more of a case of, wow, I have to be more involved now because we have to keep this running. People are going to lose their jobs, and they're going to lose their livelihoods of our staff if we do not put everything we have into keeping this running. So that necessitated a complete refit of the shop to make it more efficient and more COVID friendly. Looking at opening a roastery because we'd found great success doing bike deliveries of coffee to local people. But we were buying in that retail. So it necessitated the change in the business, and necessitated me being more involved in the business than I ever wanted to be, while holding down a full-time job of QC, importing, exporting green coffee. And there just came a time when I was like, I have to sell the whole thing now. I can't do both. I can't be 2.5 people. I have to be one person. And thankfully, a group of other baristas and ex-baristas at the time all decided to club in together. And now it's owned by 4 of my ex-staff members.
Wonderful.
Which is kind of perfect in its own way.
Yeah, it's in keeping with what
It,
you were hoping to do with it in any case, to serve your staff
yeah,
well.
it exists now. It's different. It's subtly changed over the time that I've not been involved, and I'm very okay with it. I'm really interested and excited to see where they've been taking it and the things that they are doing to make it different. It's fascinating to look at things that I wouldn't have done and gone, oh, okay, I can see why you've done that. Wouldn't be me, but then it's not mine anymore. So I have no say in the matter.
That's a hard thing to do, exercise in letting go. Even if you were still the owner, that would be still a good practice.
Yes. Oh, 100%. It was very difficult when I was still part owner, uh, to not be involved regularly, but that was a big lesson for me in that efficient delegation and going, okay, this is the person who's running it. I have to let them run it
Mm.
and take that step back. And then once I was no longer physically or actually literally invested in the company, I couldn't be emotionally invested in it anymore. So I still value what it is and what it can be, and look back on the time that I was involved in it very fondly. But yeah, I don't worry about it anymore. I think that's what people don't understand about running a business, is that you worry about it all the time.
Yeah, I heard this the other day related to organisms versus machines, and that organisms need chaos in some regard because they're
Mm,
processing and receiving and generating things that in real time. And machines are not built that way. They don't function on chaos, or thrive on it. It seems like, as we have discussed a incredibly broad range of things in this conversation, and
yeah.
through your career experiences, it would be easy to sort of categorize things and create rules and best practices, institutional wisdom, and I think those are necessary. That helps us, right?
Yeah.
But then also,
Yeah.
when you switch things up and sell your business, you enter into the chaos of, you know, losing your footing on purpose, I guess, in order to
Hmm.
thrive in the chaos as a organism is kind of built to do.
Definitely. And it was a lot of people did ask me, how would I be suddenly having an employer again? I think that's a very difficult step for a lot of people. Once they've been their own boss,
Mm.
to then be employed again and be answerable to somebody is a very difficult thing to do. Um, and it was fine. It's very fine. I'm very happy to have a boss and to take a regular salary and um, just to be employed. I don't necessarily need that freedom of owning my own business because there's a lot of worry that comes alongside that, and I was ready to let that go.
I imagine.
As you mentioned that about organisms and businesses and everything being there together, um, it's sort of instructive to sort of think back suddenly about that path that I've been on and look back at everything I've done, and it's ties back into that very first thing that got me into coffee, and that was the hospitality, the service. I got into coffee because I enjoyed being behind the bar and serving the customers. And every step along the way, that's been a predominant part of it. In everything I've done, being able to interact with people and help them and mentor them and speak for them when I need to has been crucial. And that all comes from hospitality.
And you're still involved with that in the role that you have now.
Yeah, 100%. It's a social enterprise. So we're a not-for-profit organization, whereas the goal is to be as efficient as possible in between the producers and the roasters, and as open as possible in terms of the profit margins and that we have to operate on to operate as a business, but provide as clear a path, which might be the most sustainable way to do that. It's like we're here just to provide the service and be the conduit so that you can get the coffee from the producers and the producers get the maximum amount that they can for their work and get valued for their work as well.
Well, I want to wrap this up with kind of a final question to you. In its, there's a lot of things that we have available to us in terms of issues that we could spend our time focused on. Lord knows that this podcast is one of those places that could, provide you with a ton of different directions to put your energies into. What do you see as being the main issue that we, and I say we as in anyone listening to this, I suppose, the industry, what should be addressed as a priority, and how does that relate to coffee shops or just the consuming world's structures in general? Because I feel like we have a lot of opportunity to make good on things that we see happening, we talk about, but how do we prioritize the deluge of issues that we are presented with on a daily basis?
When it comes to the coffee industry, there is no, for me, bigger issue that we can address as an industry from retail, consumer, import, export than the vast disparity in the value added and the money in the value stream. To be in a situation where producers are now making a profit in many countries only because of frosts and droughts in Brazil and supply chain issues, reducing supply and so pushing price up. And it's not by through to be in that position where they are able to earn an income that is more in keeping with the service and the product they provide through by no means of our own is kind of embarrassing. We have the power as an industry to do very simple things, which is pay the right amount for the product that we are buying. There's no adage. If it looks cheap, it probably is. And for the vast majority of the green coffee that is bought by roasters is too cheap. It's a harsh fact to understand, but it is too cheap. We fall back on this idea that the customers just won't pay it. Well, we never ask the customers if they'll pay it or not. And they might just have to if they still want to have coffee. I saw recently the cost of production in Colombia has basically doubled in the past 2 years. Now, conveniently, the price of coffee has trebled. So there is an opportunity to make a profit. But if the market switches and pushes that price back down, we know for sure that the companies supplying shipping, supplying fuel, supplying fertilizers, supplying grain pro bags, milling services, they won't push their prices down because they realize everyone will pay for it. It's like shipping isn't going to get cheaper anytime soon. The shipping lines realize we'll pay for it, so they're going to keep charging the money. We have the power to pay more money for the green coffee and filter that through our choices of our businesses to the customers and make decisions on where we spend that money and where we add the value. But we have to prioritize reducing that equity gap.
What is the reason why we would drag our heels on doing that when we don't necessarily, and maybe we do, we have a hard time raising prices just for the benefit of our own businesses, but we will do it more regularly than for the benefit of something that's not front and center in the mind. Is that the key to overcoming the inertia of price equity?
In some ways, yes. I think it's also realizing how much we have benefited from the past 20 years. The time of buying extremely cheap green coffee, selling it at good prices, retail, and being able to create very large businesses off that might be dead. And we have to understand that we took a lot of privilege as a global north and the consuming side of the industry out of that and added an enormous amount of value based on that and kept that value.
Mm-hmm.
On the whole, there are many, many who have been working tirelessly to try and return that value and to make it marketable, but also outweighed by the side of the industry that has been very happy to trumpet the amount of money it spends on shiny things.
Yes.
And not thinking that they are displaying a choice there. They're displaying a choice to spend that money there rather than reducing the shiny things and paying more for the green coffee so that or the baristas, so that the people at either end of the value stream are more adequately recompensed. Because barista wages are just as important as producer wages. They really are.
It's exactly it's a people versus thing, and the thing itself is easy to attain, and it feels good. It's more of a dopamine hit, I suppose.
Yes.
Maybe your sixth or seventh store is not necessary. And imagine, I've always kind of thought to myself, and maybe out loud on the show too, if I'm correct, if all the money that was spent to open another location that really wasn't necessary but was too, quote unquote, too good to pass up, was all of a sudden just distributed into the pockets of either you kept some of the money that you could keep and then you gave it to the people to your baristas. It's really a justification issue where, well, why should I give my staff more money? They haven't earned it.
Imagine if it was too good to pass up to pay your staff a wage where they didn't have to rely on tip. And this is something I think in a lot of countries we don't understand, that like the baristas in the UK, tips aren't a thing. They're not a thing. They're not part of wages. You don't get tips as a barista. You get your wage, and that should be enough to live off. The idea that you have to supplement your wage to allow you to live off the kindness of customers, it should be embarrassing, really, for a business owner. It should be, it should be too good to turn down that we can pay our staff a dignified wage.
Seems rather unhealthy. This is the problem that, not to make too many analogies here, but bodybuilders run into this problem in old age. Their hearts just can't keep up with the mass.
No,
and the mass of our industry is so beefed up that there has to be a necessary slimming down in some ways, but a deeper rootedness that's a little bit more sustainability would result. I feel.
Yeah, and this, I guess, links back to that what I was saying a few minutes ago. Like, this is my great hope for the future, that all the people that are hearing this and are reading it constantly, reading other people like Boss Barista, all the people that write about it, who get this idea of a more equitable industry out into the ether, and they're absorbing it, that they remember this when they get in the decision-making positions.
Right.
That they don't say, I couldn't, it was too good to pass up, so I got the next site.
Mm-hmm.
That they say, I didn't take the site because we can invest in our staff. We can invest in the green coffee.
I feel like there's a lot of the other problems in the world that we could solve if we keep talking.
Yes.
But this has been fascinating, and I'm super glad to have had you on the show. And all the things that you've shared here, I feel, are just gold. Where can we learn more about, what you're doing right now? And I know that you're writing also, correct? Where can we learn more about that?
So I have a website, like everyone does, mattnorth.com, where I've just collected all the things I've written over the years, and when my fingers remember how to work, I will continue to write things. I will probably post a link to this on there as well when it's available. And also, you can find me at rawmaterial.coffee, which is the company I work for to import green coffee. And if you're anywhere in Europe, you can probably find me judging brewed coffee or counting how much coffee you're putting into your portafilter at a competition, because that's what I also do. International Coffee Judge for Hire.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll keep an eye out, and definitely put links in the show notes. Matt, thank you again. This was a great conversation.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Well, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. And more importantly, I hope that you were able to pull away some inspiration and maybe some next steps for how you will conduct business in your coffee shops. And, this last thing that we talked about in terms of what to focus on in the industry, obviously there's a huge price disparity on how farmers are compensated for their coffee. And it's, I guess, too easy for us to just say that's somebody else's responsibility. One of the things that I think is great about Matt's approach to business and to coffee, and this comes also from his training in physics, is looking below the surface, kind of being always curious and being a learner and digging to find what's really going on and questioning the status quo. And I think if we do that collectively, we'll come up with more solutions that will end up moving the needle more on these issues. And I'm so happy that he got to share some of his wisdom with us that he's learned over these past 2 decades of his coffee career. So a huge thank you to Matt North for being our guest on the show. If you want to stay in touch with Matt and his thoughts on the industry and writings, there are 2 places you could go. You could go to mattnorth.com. That's Matt with 1 T. And then you can also follow on Instagram at Matt_North. And of course, those are going to be linked up in the show notes as well. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode, I would love to hear those. And also, if you're interested in hiring a coach to help you gain clarity in your business and build a foundation and systems to thrive and take your business and your people and yourself to the next level, there's a lot of ways that we can work together at Keys to the Shop Consulting. You can email me at that same email address to set up a free discovery call. That's chris@keystotheshop.com. And, I really love meeting people who listen to Keys to the Shop. One of the places I get to do that often is at Coffee Fest trade shows, which I've been going to since 2004, almost every one. And I love seeing people there because I know that they're in the midst of gaining an amazing experience of being equipped and resourced and inspired to run great coffee bars, successful and profitable businesses. Coffee Fest has been going on for 30 years. It's not just a trade show, but it also, like I said, equips you to do great business in coffee through free and accessibly priced lectures, workshops and trainings and panel discussions. We also have the cold brew competition and latte art competition. The trade show floor with all the vendors to interact with is amazing too. And then this concentration of like-minded coffee professionals in one place is just, you can't really replace that with anything. All that together makes Coffee Fest one of the most important events for you to attend. You can use the code KEYS, KEYS, to get 50% off your registration for upcoming shows in 2023. We've got New York City, we've got Louisville, Kentucky, and then Anaheim, California, and then a fourth one coming up, yet to be announced, but stay tuned for that one. I'll be at all of these shows, and I hope to see you there as well. Use the code KEYS to get 50% off when you sign yourself and your team up over at coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of the show, everyone. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be inspired with me and Matt North. Always a pleasure to have you along. Don't forget to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Share these episodes with your friend on your social channels. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.